Hello everyone! Welcome to a very special video. I'm DTM as always, and with Book 5 coming to a close soon, and Book 6 on the horizon, I think it would be a great idea to take a look back at what has developed during that time. The AR meta has definitely shifted a lot, at least in the first half, and we definitely had some new units that shook the game. So let's rank them! Let's rank the top 10 meta-impactful units introduced in Book 5. These are the units that changed AR for better or for worse, and the units you need to consider when doing offense or defense. As always, if you like the content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that jazz to help support the channel. This video took a long time to make and was so much work, and I would really appreciate if you would just take 5 seconds to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to reach 400 subscribers this month, and I'm truly grateful for all the support you've shown me. And huge shout out to Joel from Fehology who helped me in creating this video. Check them out, they're amazing. The link to their channel will be in the description. Now, before we begin, what does it mean to be meta impactful? Well, how a unit impacts a meta is kind of nebulous and even more subjective than judging how good a unit is. However, to me, it is important to note that a unit being meta impactful is not the same as a unit being good. For instance, do I think Milla is the best light mythic right now? No, I think Peony is by far the best light mythic and probably the best mythic overall. But do I think Peony is as meta impactful as Milla? Absolutely not. Milla is one of the few units that defines light and dark season. Every dark defense needs to consider her when building a defense because her isolation effect has a huge impact in how defenses operate. Thus, what is meta impactful is more of a measure of what you need to consider. A good way to look at meta impact is asking the question, if this unit didn't exist, would anything change? Or how would things change? If Peony didn't exist, I don't think dark defenses would change that much, as even though she is the best light mythic, you don't really need to consider her when designing a dark defense, as there are a lot of dancers. However, if Milla didn't exist, then you bet a lot of things would change when defenses don't need to worry as much about her isolation effect. Also, in terms of meta-impactful units, a unit's prevalence, their popularity in being used, is extremely important. It doesn't matter how powerful or how much their unique utility impacts anything if no one uses them. If a unit is not being used that much, you don't really need to consider them when designing or playing offense or defense. Thus, availability matters to some extent, especially when it comes to sparking or popular banners. It's not entirely a popularity contest, but it does play a role in what is meta impactful. This also means that units that have roles in strategies that aren't as common or are quote-unquote harder to pull off are less meta impactful. This is especially true for units that excel in something like Gale Force. Valoria, for example, is insanely impactful for Gale Force strategies, where having her can make or break games. But she isn't meta impactful because Gale Force isn't really a common strategy as opposed to tanking. Now, it is important to note that how a unit can impact offense versus defense is very different. For starters, it is a lot easier for a unit to have an impact as an AR defense unit than as an AR offense unit. AR is still very offense favored, and what that means is that there is a very limited number of defense archetypes that are consistent enough to net results. Thus, meta defenses are more centralized, and the limited number means that it is very easy for an AR defense unit to be common and shake things up. A good example of this is Thrasier, where once she was released, she was basically everywhere and removed dragons from Astra Season for a long time. Offense, meanwhile, there is a lot more variety and options on offense, and thus it is harder to have that sort of prevalence or impact for a single unit. It is very difficult for a single unit to make a splash on AR offense. I think really the only unit that have recently been meta impactful is Brave Hector, who is just so good and so overtuned that so many people are using him on offense, and thus you need to consider him when building a defense. Same with Ninja Lin actually, but those two aren't Book 5 units. For the purposes of this list, we are only going to consider individual units that were introduced to Fire Emblem Heroes in Book 5, from Reagan's banner last December to now, and only units will be considered, not skills, not structures, not groups of units or archetypes, etc. This should hopefully keep things simple, but there may be some honorable mentions that I may bring up later. Well, without further ado, let us begin with number 10. All hail our damage reduction piercing savior. Young Innes is a unit that I'm pretty sure you have heard of a lot. Ever since his release, his weapon being able to cut through damage reduction has caused his hype to go through the roof. Him being a Grail unit also meant that everyone could use him if they wanted to. His high speed and attack, along with being easily mergeable, allows him to do a huge amount of damage, and his ability to ignore damage reduction when his special procs allows him to just cut through a lot of the meta units, and especially Flame. With like save balls running around everywhere, supported by either Flame or Niffle being meta, he provides an answer to that sort of meta team that is extremely accessible. And because of that, he is quite prevalent on defense. I myself have ran into a bunch of plus 10 Young Innes, and yeah, please keep that away. However, he is only number 10, and the reason why I think he isn't higher is because, for one, he does have mediocre bulk, leaving him susceptible to getting one-shotted or just taken out on the player phase. And also, since his unique ability requires his special to proc, he can, keyword being can, be weak to guard effects, unless you pre-charge it with like Quicken Pulse or Infantry Pulse. Furthermore, although he is ranged, he doesn't have cavalry movement, and so the amount of pressure he can apply is limited, although it can be worked around. He is a unit that does pose a threat, but generally you don't really need a hard counter to him to consider him that much when he's on AR defense. Like, you just sort of either try to work around that or deal with it as you go in. Obviously, he's still number 10, but compared to the other units on this list, he isn't as impactful on the meta. Which brings us to number 9. Continuing with our apparent love for the Young Sacred Stones banner, at least this early on, we have at number 9 the Holy Woman herself, Young La Rochelle. So, Young La Rochelle, on release, really cemented herself as one of the best staffed cavalry units in the game, especially on defense, with the only real competition being Brave Veronica and Elise. However, unlike Brave Veronica or Elise, she doesn't even need to enter combat to support the defense, with her flash effect activating at the start of turn. Having 5 range on that effect is huge, and makes it so that any bait play needs to account for that flash effect being applied. And playing into a team with her, you either need to work around that flash effect or try to avoid it. Being one of the premier staff cavalry units, and able to run odd recovery, and already coming with rescue, she quickly became prevalent on AR defense, and is still quite a force to this day. However, since she is a premium seasonal unit, she is not as common as a lot of other units on this list, and having no spark limits the amount of players that were able to have her and put her on defense, especially when many other staff cavalry units can do the job as well, like the aforementioned Brave Veronica and Elise, or even Nana, for example. In addition, with save skills surging in the meta, her flash effect's power has been limited. Since she can only really target the nearest foe with that flash effect, save balls can circumvent this by simply having their save tanks be behind a support unit that would still be covered. Obviously, being a huge offensive staff cavalry unit is still amazing and she has a lot of power, but her unique effect has its impact lessened as time went by. It still does matter though, which is why she's at number 9, but less so recently, especially if you don't have a save ball. Number 8. Now, I hear you in the comments. Fallen Edelgard is the most overpowered unit ever, how is she not number 1? and all the way down at number 8? Well, if you give me a moment, I will explain. Personally, I think Fallen Edelgard is extremely strong on AR offense as a Gale Force or Hit and Run unit. The ability to have 3 actions in a turn is unparalleled, and you can just eliminate her threats if you play her aggressively. Unfortunately, most players in the vault generally use her as a tank, which leads to less than stellar results. Trust me, I tried so hard and she let me down so many times. She's no Brave Hector, that's for sure. Thus, it is very rare for Fallen Edelgard to actually have an impact on the meta as an AR offense unit, despite me thinking she excels there. However, in AR defense, she is so common, it's sort of become a meme nowadays to expect corner Fallen Edelgards, despite that being a terrible idea, and corner units in general being a terrible idea. Also, I think Fallen Edelgard is very bad on AR defense, since at best she has infantry melee threat range and can't actually reach and snipe opponents. Trust me, I tried, and she let me down so hard despite my constant attempts. It's so bad. She's generally more of an annoyance than an actual threat most of the time. You don't even need hard counters to deal with her, despite what many in the community think. However, what is meta impactful is not the same as what is good. And because Fallen Edelgard is so common on AR defense, you generally stand to gain a huge advantage, or at least less stress, if you consider running into her when preparing to play AR offense. Her being the star in probably the highest grossing banner of Book 5, and that banner being sparkable, and her just being super hyped, means that she is extremely popular and common on AR defense, and in an ironic sort of way, despite her lackluster performance on defense, still manages to impact the meta due to her prevalence. Thus, it would be wrong to not have her here on this list, although obviously she is only number 8, as I think the units above her are not only actually more threatening, but close to, if not just as common. But yeah, she's a meme on defense, and even more of a meme if you put her in a corner, so let's just not use corner Fallen Edelgards, or keep doing them so we can get free wins. Number 7. Does anyone even remember the dark days of Astra Season? Back then, when there was only Altina and Naga as our Astra Mythic? When Astra was a season of huge suffering, when Thrasier ruined everyone's runs. Thankfully, in September of last year, Plumeria graced us unworthy players with her presence, and 2 months later, Reagan saved us all. Can anyone remember a time without Reagan? That is how impactful she was to Astra Season. Being the first Astra Mythic given out for free to everyone, and being a very good unit in her own right, she defines Astra Season. Everyone has her, and defenses need to take her into account. Her Canto allows for great and easy hit and run tactics, or just clean structure clearing. And now with Safe Defense, her Canto ability is even more powerful. Combine that with her pre-charge special, and she can crush tanks and get out if you don't take her into account. I know I personally had to redesign my defense to take into account her abilities after watching some replays, whether that be layout changes or switching units because of the Reagan matchup. So yeah, Reagan basically changed the face of Astra Season, and though she is pretty universal, I will have to admit that her utility and abilities are not often used to the fullest extent on AR offense in the vault. More often than not, she structure clears or repositions than Canto. There are very few instances where her hit and run potential is fully realized, and thus you don't have to consider that capability as much when building a defense. Since her impact is dependent on players realizing her full capabilities, at least in the vault, her impact on the meta is not as high as it could be for most replays. Don't get me wrong, things would definitely change if she didn't exist, and unlocking the 6th slot on offense is already powerful in and of itself, but her full impact isn't as prevalent as, say, Brave Hector. In the current meta, the path of least resistance is essentially tanking with save balls, which limits a lot of Reagan's potential, when most of what she is used for is just setting that up with like structure clears and stuff like that. which is why even though she is like still on this list as a meta impactful unit, she is at number 7. Number 6. And now we go in with the first of many meta impactful red cavalry units that have made my brave Ike cry. We start at number 6 with legendary Lilina, the first red horseman of the AR Apocalypse. She is a menace. Having an instantly charged AoE with the Hardy Bearing effect in her weapon makes her basically an Ophelia on a horse. Though Gifted Magic has less power than Blazing Wind, her high offensive stats makes it so that she can easily cut through units with that AoE, providing a lot of aggressive pressure. Like, if anyone knows how oppressive Ophelia was when she first released, Lilina is like that, except with even more range. The instant AoE requires opponents to plan around that AoE, whether in prep or in execution. And trust me, whenever it is fire season, she is super common, especially since her power, and she has an amazing share on her debut banner with Plumeria and Reagan, which is a banner I still regret not pulling to this day, because that had some amazing value in 2 Astro Mythics, and, well, Lilina as a unit. Whenever fire season comes around, your offense team needs to be able to take her on. And yeah, she's definitely difficult to deal with, but does have quite a bit of counterplay to her. For starters, she is fire season locked. However, the main issue is that she has very subpar bulk. And currently on defense, you want units that are bulky enough to survive at least a round of combat. In addition, one of the premier far-save tanks in the game right now, Brave Hector, generally can deal with her just fine assuming proper play. And as mentioned before, Gifted Magic is not as strong as Blazing Wind. Careful positioning with save skills can allow the far save unit to not get hit by the AoE, and provided the far save unit is competent, can generally survive and then one-shot legendary Lilina. One-shotting Lilina is not that hard, unfortunately for her, and thus as long as you can survive or mitigate her damage, she is generally not a problem you need to consider, though obviously surviving her is a lot easier said than done, which is why she is at number 6. Also, she faces a lot of competition as a red mage cavalry unit, especially one that perhaps is more bulky. Maybe they can even cut through damage reduction. Maybe they can even enable dual hindrance. I wonder what that unit could be. Number 5. Why, if it isn't the dual unit of the hour? Another member of the Red Horsemen of the AR Apocalypse, we have Dual Leap. Not just content with trying to destroy Asker, they have decided to destroy our fun times in AR as well. So, what needs to be said about Dual Leap? Well, first off, unlike legendary Lilina, Dual Leap is incredibly bulky, easily able to survive, say, a bonfire from Fallen Edelgard, for example. This way, even if he doesn't get the kill, he still provides a threat after the combat, regardless of whether or not he gets dance. Being able to survive means that the opponent has one more unit to potentially deal with. Of course, it's just not his bulk, but his power that makes him very impactful. Having an auto double and being able to cut through damage reduction is huge, and to be able to consistently do that without relying on special procs, it's something really only Dual Leap can do. Fatal Smoke is just a cherry on top to either secure those kills or leave the opponent in a state that they can be picked off by other units. Add into the fact that he's a dual unit, able to enable the dual hindrance structures, and you have the perfect recipe for a dominating unit. Really, the only dual unit that comes close to his impact is Dual Sigurd, who unfortunately is not Book 5, and Dual Peony, which is a lot less impactful and unique than, say, a 3 movement range dancer. Though I personally say Dual Leap are about equal in terms of dual units to use in ARD. Add into the fact that Dual Leap is extremely prevalent and essentially everywhere due to being on this year's Valentine's banner, which was probably the single most meta-shifting banner this year. It was a banner that gave out 10 tickets, it was during anniversary, it also had a far and near save. It was just super popular and super impactful. Personally, I'd say it's mainly because of Dual Leaf that a lot of green tanks are in a struggling place right now. He has that impact. My Brave Ike is very sad at this development. Now, he is only 5 on this list, which is still very high, but there are some things that I think just makes him not go higher. For one, even though Fatal Smoke can support other units getting kills, he is mainly a combat unit and doesn't really have a special utility that is supportive. His uniqueness is to the benefit of his combat, not to his teammates. Because of that, he can more easily be replaced with another ranged cavalry if he didn't exist than the units above this list, though obviously not to the same effect as actually having him. Honestly, that's the main reason why he's only number 5. We are getting into the upper range, but you just need to deal with him, not any sort of effects or boons he might grant us to the defense, which actually leads us to number 4. Oh boy, is there ever a unit that has caused so much chaos and intimidation, so much notoriety as Legendary Sigurd, the final member of the Red Horsemen of the AR Apocalypse. What more needs to be said? For one thing, he is incredibly bulky with high defense and pretty good resistance, not to mention damage reduction when he initiates, so good luck trying to snipe him. In addition, he has Fatal Smoke, which makes his killing power even more potent, as we discussed with Dual Leaf. But obviously those reasons are not why he's meta impactful, though they do help. The main reason is because of Holy Knight Aura, and its completely insane +1 movement effects if it procs. Because Legendary Sigurd has Slaying, and Holy Knight Aura is 2 cooldown, you can just slap Quicken Pulse, and that special is pre-charged. Giving every unit on your team +1 movement, including cavalry units, is absolutely crazy, and makes it so that the enemy generally has nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. And of course, he has 4 movement himself, because why not at that point? Unlike Dual Leaf, who is just an individual threat, Legendary Sigurd makes the entire defense more threatening, and his effect is something you need to consider. Players in Vault literally run even Pulse Tie just because of Legendary Sigurd. Players run even Pulse Tie for no other reason other than to deal with Legendary Sigurd. That is how big his impact is. No other unit has this utility, and you bet if he didn't exist, AR would be extremely different. And being on a legendary banner in the midst of an amazing Golden Week made him extremely prevalent in the Vault of Heavens, especially during win season. The only reason why he isn't higher is because since Safety Fence, the meta has shifted very slightly away from just simple high threat range teams, just slightly, as those are still very strong and prevalent. He is also win season locked, though you can often find off-season Legendary Sigurds, which thankfully are easier to deal with. But yeah, make no mistake, he had and continues to have a huge meta impactful presence to this day, and is a unit still feared by myself and many others, and something we need to take into account. Number 3. Oh Seros, how you changed Anima Season. When she was introduced, she immediately made an impact as a mythic that could unlock the 7th slot on AR defense. As we all know, that capability changed pretty much all of Ether Raids, from Dancer Traps to just having another unit to deal with on defense. The ability to unlock the 7th slot is unparalleled and is something that every player playing AR offense needs to deal with. Now why Seros and not another Anima mythic that also unlocks the 7th slot, like Odor? Well, it's mainly because of prevalence. Almost everyone in the Vault uses Seros, because for one, she is a much more popular character, and 2, she was sparkable on the Hero Rises banner that was super hyped up, with amazing color share at the time, and being the only defensive mythic at the time that unlocked the 7th slot. Virtually everyone that took AR seriously sparked for her, including myself. Oder, meanwhile, though I do think is a slight upgrade to Seros, isn't really worth it to replace her. I think if Seros didn't exist, Oder would still not be as prevalent, mainly due to his very big unpopularity. What holds her back is that she herself isn't really a good unit. Wings of Light right now doesn't actually matter, and her combat is mediocre due to her limited threat range, and she doesn't really provide any other utility besides the 7th slot, so it is really a testament to how impactful that 7th slot is and how prevalent Seros has become. Almost every defense you will encounter in the Vault of Heavens will have her, so players playing into the Vault will definitely want to be able to deal with her to improve their game. Number 2. You know what is better, though, than a unit that unlocks the 7th slot? A unit that does so while also actually being a good unit. Meet Not. Everything I said about Seros can basically apply to Not when it comes to the 7th slot. In addition, she was also Sparkable and the first Dark Mythic to unlock the 7th slot. So again, everyone that took AR seriously sparked for her because we all know the impact the 7th slot has on defense. But not only does she unlock the 7th slot, she also has Pathfinder, arguably one of the best effects you could have on defense. Even post-safe defense, the ability to extend your team's threat range and create more overlap is very powerful, and there isn't a unit that can do that other than Dagger, who is an offensive mythic. Pathfinder adds a lot of pressure and unpredictability against your opponent. Not defines Light and Dark Season. Remove her and you completely change the meta of Light and Dark Season. I don't think anyone would go against that. She was and still is that impactful. So why isn't she number 1? Well, just like Seros, she is limited to 1 season, so her impact is really only felt half the time in AR, despite her literally being everywhere in Dark Season. There is one unit, in my opinion, that has the same, if not more capability to provide offensive threat, and can be used in both seasons, and recently has become extremely prevalent as well. But before we get to our number 1, let's go over some honorable mentions. So our first honorable mention is Brave Hector, who is honestly still the best overall tank in the game, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. His Refine is over a year old and he's still overall the best. Every defense still needs to take him into account, and is one of the few units that has that impact as an AR offense unit. Unfortunately, he is not Book 5, but I can't make this list without including him as an honorable mention. Next is Linja. Ninja Lin and her being given out for free basically changed the meta in a way you might not think. Yes, she is extremely powerful unit on offense, but her winning AHR basically made everyone in the vault put up dual hindrances if they hadn't already. This Ninja Lin incident, as I like to call it, has effectively made dual skills useless in AR to this day, so in that way she made her mark. Unfortunately, again, she is just barely before Book 5, but if she was in it, she would have definitely been on this list. Next honorable mention is Ascended Fjorm, which has only been released about a month ago, but has shown her potential as an amazing far-safe tank. Having no counter disrupt in her weapon, along with Ice Mirror and Hardy Fire, gives her a very unique niche and capabilities to overcome a lot of the weaknesses of normal save skill stuff, mainly the lack of no counter disrupt. However, personally, I think it's a bit too early to say whether or not she has impacted the meta, and I do have my skepticisms. Regardless, she is definitely a unit that deserves at least an honorable mention. And save skills. This line of skills is probably the most meta impactful addition IS has ever developed. The current meta right now is completely centralized on save skills, being pretty straightforward to use, while also being the most consistent option to clearing maps. They have made their mark on both offense and defense. However, this list is on individual units, And quite frankly, there is such a wide variety of save armors that no single unit can really centralize the meta, especially considering most of the popular options are from before Book 5, like Brave Hector or Brave Edelgard for example. And our last honorable mention is Selena, or Selena. Selena, since her release, became essentially the go-to Windsweep Mage Cavalry unit. Being blue and going toe-to-toe with Reinhardt is an amazing feat. She is definitely the most common Windsweep unit from my experience, and a staple in Cavalry defenses. Her high speed and attack, as well as the NFU in her weapon, allows her to deal a huge amount of damage, while also not being afraid of any counterattacks most of the time. Unfortunately, she is extremely frail, and these days, with decent speed stacking, you can consistently outspeed her, or just run an NCD unit. She has definitely started to fall off. But with those honorable mentions out of the way, it's time to move on to... Number 1. I remember back when I reacted to this year's Bridal banner. I'm pretty sure I said that the units on the banner were kinda underwhelming. I was interested in Bridal Catria's effects, but thought that it was too unwieldy to actually incorporate into a defense. Well, I was wrong, and so were a lot of other people. With the advent of the safety fence and the rise of save armors on defense, Bridal Catria has become the cornerstone of probably the most effective defensive archetype in the current meta, the Catria Ball. The amount of offensive threat she can provide with her triangle attack is unrivaled. The Brave effect she grants is extremely difficult to deal with, and for most units is untankable. Add on to that the Orders-like effect that comes with triangle attack, and you make your defense very unpredictable and with overlapping ranges, and this is something players have to deal with. In the olden times, the main weakness of Catria Balls were their limited threat range, and to some extent that is still the case. When she was released, we were entering the legendary Sigurd and Not timeline, with hugely oppressive ranged cavalry units being the norm. The meta was high threat range, turn 1 initiation, and leaving the opponent with no room to hide. Catria Balls back then left too much space compared to those teams, and were thus relatively uncommon compared to those other teams. With Safety Fence, however, more and more defenses have began to use save armors to help protect the defense from aggressive player phase strategies that Safety Fence makes easier. And what do you know? Catria Balls with save armors are such a powerful combo that they quickly became widespread. With a focus now on protecting the defense while still having a lot of pressure, Catria Balls rose in prominence and are now very prevalent. Catria grants so much offensive power that defenses can focus up on shoring up the defense, with things like save armors for protection. With the double special heroes banner, with her just recently coming by, she is basically a staple and a unit that everyone needs to be aware of and have some sort of counterplay. No other unit does what she do. You cannot replace Bridal Catria with any of the current units. If she did exist, the current meta would definitely be different. I mean, it isn't called a Catria Ball for nothing. And the thing is, she is able to run on both seasons, and I would argue is prominent enough to be more meta impactful. I mean, people are considering running Brave Gatekeeper just to counter Bridal Catria's warping effect. That's how much impact Bridal Catria has, and why I consider her to be the #1 most impactful unit introduced in Book 5. So yeah, there you have it, my top 10 most impactful units introduced in Book 5. As always, this is just my opinion, and I would love to hear what you all think are the most impactful units in Book 5. Do you agree with this list? Do you not? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, if you like the content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that jazz to help support the channel. Once again, this video took a long time to make, and I worked super hard on it, so I would really appreciate you just taking 5 seconds to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to reach 400 subscribers this month, and I'm truly grateful to all the support you've shown me. And once again, huge shout out to Joel from Fehology, who helped me in creating this video. Check them out, they're amazing. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and see you all next time.